Some questions, Shenxiang.
Question 1. Dear Ajahn, thanks for taking my question. Are you able to offer some advice to someone, both practical and spiritual, who has the intention to go forth but is unable to do so for a few years due to family obligations? Thank you.
Yes. So we take the 5 ethical precepts as our foundation standard, as good Buddhist practitioners. And then Lord Buddha said that lay people should keep the 8 precepts on the Uposatha day. Sometimes that doesn't always work out for modern people, but you can do a Saturday or a Sunday instead, where you take one day a week where you don't have an evening meal, you don't sleep on a soft bed, you don't seek out entertainment, etc. So if a person does this strict practice of 8 precepts once a week, every week for a year, that you've had like a month and a half where you've been an 8 preceptor in every year. And after 10 years, you've kept the 8 precepts for a year and a half. It does add up, and it does help to kind of lay that habit of having the ability to practice more renunciation and practice patient endurance with things like hunger and stiff back or whatever, various things. And so I think a daily chanting practice, if you want to be a monk or a nun, you should kind of take on some of the good, skillful habits of monks and nuns. And so I would say, yeah, some chanting each day, some meditation each day, 8 precepts once a week. And I generally tell people to try to do good practice, in my opinion, really good practice, but I'm not judging people. I'm just trying to give you directions that would be helpful. I understand a lot of people are busy, but if your life gives the opportunity, the best way to practice is 3 times a day. So because it's natural for the mind to get kind of dull and fuzzy and clouded, and so we have to keep brightening it up. And if you meditate in the morning, maybe it's not possible to have a formal sitting session 3 times a day yet, but you might find there are ways to have 3 periods of spiritual activity. So maybe you chant in the morning and meditate for a bit before going to work. Maybe you can listen to a Dhamma talk while doing something else. You can have a Dhamma talk that you're listening to in the background at a certain other time. You know, maybe you sit before you go to work, establish some clarity, establish some presence of mind, set the intention to be mindful throughout all postures. Another period of time, maybe after lunch, maybe you can listen to a Dhamma talk. Your mind might be a bit groggy, might not be so suitable to sit, but you can hear some Dhamma, contemplate some Dhamma. And then in the evening, chant before you sleep. And then you've got like 3 times a day where you've been doing these spiritual activities. And so if one can do something like that, when it comes time to live in a monastery, the transition, firstly, you're accumulating the type of auspicious spiritual merits that will make it possible to go forth, because all of these things create good karma. But you're also making it possible that once you're in the monastery, that you'll actually be able to cope with it, because you've been cultivating the ability to do monastic-like things in a disciplined, focused, repetitive way, which is much of what monastic life is, repetitive disciplines. And and then I think also dedicating the merits in that particular way, just like I dedicated merit, may I one day be able to go to Wutai-san? I was invited after 20 years. These things do work. It can take time for the merits to trickle down the pipeline. And but merit, aspiration, focus, repetition, it does work. So, yeah. Chant, meditate, listen to Dhamma talks, keep precepts. That's the foundation of being a Sangha member. In a way, you're a lay Sangha when you do that. And I hope that's helpful. And if you don't get to become a monk or a nun this lifetime, you have so and potent spiritual merits and increase the causes of possibly being able to in a future life. So
Question 2. Dear Ajahn, I realize that I can focus more while doing metta meditation. If that's the case, may I check if I should focus on doing metta meditation instead of breath meditation? Thank you, Ajahn.
What has worked for me is to combine both. So cultivating metta with a broad basic awareness of the in and out breath. Breathing in, may I be well. Breathing out, may I be happy. So when we're cultivating loving kindness, we're not making knowing the breath in its subtlety and refinement the main object, but we do still maintain some awareness of it. And then in general, it's good to have several practices, but I don't see any issue with taking metta as the main practice for the first 10, 15, 20 minutes of, say, a 40-minute session. One can take metta as the main practice that one uses to establish well-being and gladness, contentment in the mind. In general, though, we need to do a few different types of practice because you do need to have sharp mindfulness in order to recognize what is wholesome, what is unwholesome, what is skillful, what is unskillful. So we're not just aiming for happiness, gladness, or brightness. We need what they call sati sampajanya, the mindfulness and clear comprehension. We need the mindfulness that knows what is skillful, what is unskillful, what is neutral. And we need that mindfulness to have enough power and energy to it that it can separate from the unskillful or put down the unskillful when it arises in the mind. So metta is great practice for cultivating gladness, brightness, well-being, produces merit. But then I think if the mind is bright and happy, then try to be aware of the breath. Take the breath as the object. Once one has made the mind bright and glad and happy, then take the breath as the object, because bringing the awareness in and being aware of a subtle breath consistently, it just helps establish a sense of clarity that's in the center of experience. And then that clarity is very important because it helps you know what you're thinking, what you're about to say, what you want to say, how you're reacting. We do need to have this clarity in the mind so that we can keep an eye on it. There is the near enemy to loving kindness. If a person practices a lot of loving kindness, there's a tendency to become infatuated or feel affection, fall in love with people. I remember Ajahn Achalo giving a Dhamma talk when I was a one Pansa monk, and he said, metta practice can lead to feelings of affection, love, and things much worse. It's a kind of joke that monks enjoy. And so, sensuality, metta can fall into sensuality and sexuality. So we want that clarity of mind, that presence of mind, and to recognize. Real metta is somewhat objective and ultimately impartial. So when we're cultivating metta, we're trying to have equal metta for all beings impartially. And so that's not easy. That requires other spiritual faculties to also be functioning. We also need equanimity to balance our metta. And but yes, one can take it as a large part of one's practice. And then, but once the mind is bright and glad, somewhat one-pointed, one should be able to direct the clarity and presence of mind that comes from that to being aware of the in and out breaths.
Ajahn, question 3. Dear Ajahn, is there a level to reach through meditation where you'll be totally disconnected from the physical world around, like a complete switch off button, where there is no feeling, no pain, nothing, just total disconnection? Also, I saw on YouTube a Buddhist monk where he was able to die consciously. Please may you kindly tell us in which stage of meditation is this? Is it Sama Samadhi? Thank you.
Unfortunately, this leans towards the nihilistic tendency, and probably there's a bit of aversion there, aversion to the impingement that comes from sense contact. And yeah, on one level, it's fair enough. It's fair enough to feel that there's a lot of impingement. Lord Buddha did say that being a conscious being with the five khandhas is a bit like being a cow with his skin taken off, with flies constantly landing on him. That's Lord Buddha does give great analogies. That's what it's like to be a conscious being with an eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, body and mind consciousness, and tongue consciousness. That the constant impingement that affects the mind, it is wearying, but you can't nuke it, you can't annihilate it. What you can do is incline the mind to more one-pointed states and samatha states, so that the feelings, wholesome, pleasant feelings. So they'll look at the factors of jhana, vitaka, vichara, piti, sukha, ekagata, placing the mind on a wholesome object, allowing the mind to settle on that object, really knowing that object, really being with that object. Then feelings of rapture arise. So that can be the breath meditation, could be metta meditation, could be a reflective meditation. But when one is consistently with that meditation object that is wholesome, feelings of rapture arise. And then feelings of tranquility, deeper serenity, and then one-pointedness. The experience of one-pointedness isn't switching off. It's a sublimation. It's an evolution. It's a lifting up to a more wholesome spectrum of experience. So what happens when the mind attains to the one-pointedness is that peacefulness becomes the object. Really, really deep, beautiful, nourishing, cool peacefulness. And it's tranquility and rapture, wholesome tranquility and rapture, that leads the mind into that. And so rather than trying to get away from sense contact based on irritation, we have to train our mind to pick up the skillful and truly become familiar with the skillful, and then allow the mind to be bathed in the rapture and the tranquility that is a result of that, and then just inside being quieter and quieter, more and more still, more and more still. Apparently, some people in the first jhana can still hear sounds, but there's no sense of a person listening. The sounds aren't affecting the mind. There's no awareness of pain in the body, because the mind has come inwards and peacefulness is the object. Apparently, other people, when they're in the first jhana, don't hear sounds. There's some difference from character. There's difference between the other jhanas. I personally don't have fourth jhana, but I know some people who do. Apparently, fourth jhana is pure equanimity. Equanimity is not, it's a profound samadhi state. It is detached. The reason it's detached is because it has purity as its pure peacefulness as its object. Because it has a purity and pure peacefulness as its object, it's detached from coarse sensory input, and it's extremely pleasant. So the second jhana is more pleasant, the third jhana is more pleasant, the fourth pleasant, but the mind is not affected. You often hear that phrase when the Buddha is describing, but the mind was not falling into liking or disliking of that samadhi state. It's like covetousness. The phrase is covetousness and grief for the world. So no grieving for, no craving for, no aversion against. So it's an ongoing training. We train to bring the mind into every meditation state. We train to bring the mind into more of a balanced state, more of a wholesome state. And that sense of balance and that sense of wholesomeness gets profound. It becomes profoundly balanced, equipoised, and unswayed by liking and disliking. And Ponan very, very frequently says, "Mai yin di, mai yin lai, wang chit ben glang," not liking, not disliking, placing the mind in the middle, keeping the mind centered in the middle, not swaying. And so the more we do that with confidence and faith and consistency, the more amazing the peacefulness and fullness and coolness becomes. But it does require skillful effort. So I hope and then second part of the question, this person saw something on YouTube about a monk who was able to die consciously. Is that Sama Samadhi? So with regard to dying consciously, I think if you're in a samadhi state, when you die, you will be born as a Brahma Deva. So it is possible to die, for the body to die when the mind's in a concentrated state. But the outcome, the next birth will be a Brahma realm. And that is not recommended by Lord Buddha as a place to cultivate insight and liberation, because the mind is so absorbed in its collectedness that it can't contemplate the three characteristics and can't be liberated. Probably dying consciously, I think that's more of an upajara state, like a neighborhood concentration state. And yes, it is possible, I believe, for beings well practiced to be conscious as they're dying and be mindful in the dying process and direct their mind to the aspired for skillful rebirth. It's probably advanced, but it's possible. And Sama Samadhi would be a factor in being able to die in neighborhood concentration with perfect clarity. It says the Buddha, one of the qualities of the Buddha when he descends from Tushita heaven in his life before his final birth, is that mindful and fully aware, the Bodhisattva descended from the Tushita heaven, mindful and fully aware. The Bodhisattva entered the womb of his mother, and his mother had the dream of the white elephant coming into her as well.
Sadhu, may we all be mindful when we die.
Sadhu, may you be like mindful in your life is what makes you mindful when you die.
Ajahn, question 4. Dear Ajahn, may I know where can I read up more on the history of the past 7 Buddhas? I learnt it from the recent chanting on the homage to the past 7 Buddhas. Will you be able to share a little more with us, so that I can make it a point to recollect all the Buddhas instead of recollecting only the Lord Buddha, Shayamuni Buddha? Also, is Maitreya Buddha the 8th Buddha, and will there be no more Buddhas thereafter? Many thanks for your guidance. Thank you.
So there is a chant in the Paritta chanting where we recite the names of 7 Buddhas in the Pali tradition. So apparently Sikhi and Wesabu were 2 Buddhas who existed 20 eons before this eon. And Lord Buddha does mention them in the suttas. And what's interesting is there was then 20 eons where there were no Buddhas. This is something to be mindful of. When people say that you're very fortunate to have met the Buddha's teachings and it takes a lot of merit to meet the Buddha's teachings and one shouldn't take this for granted, I believe that's true. That eons and eons and eons can go by where they don't arise. Buddhas don't just arise because they want to. They need beings to have karmic connections. They need the beings to have enough merit to meet a Buddha. So apparently there's like fields of bodhisattvas up in Tushita heaven ready to come down and teach, but they have to wait for their disciples to get it together before they can come down and teach them. So that's part of the reason it takes so long. And then there was Kakusanda, Konagama, and Kassapa in this eon before we had our beautiful Gautama, wonderful Gautama Buddha. And then there will be Maitreya. So after Maitreya, are there more Buddhas? Yes, there are. There will be more Buddhas in the future. And probably many more. As long as there is beings in samsara, there will probably be Buddhas occasionally coming to try to help them. And I remember reading in the introduction to the Great Disciples of the Buddha something about Sikhi and Wesabu and the previous Buddhas of this eon. In terms of in the Pali Canon, there is a Buddha Wangsa in which where Lord Buddha did describe many previous Buddhas, where they. I mean, it's really interesting because when our Buddha got his prediction from Dipankara Buddha, when Sameda got his prediction from Dipankara Buddha, this is a thing like for a Bodhisattva practitioner to be guaranteed Buddhahood, he needs to receive a prediction from a teaching Buddha. And so Sumedha got the prediction from Dipankara Buddha, and Dipankara Buddha was able to see, with the amazing mind of a Buddha, was able to see that in such and such an eon, you will be born in this clan with parents of this name, you will have this name, you will be born under such and such a Bodhi tree, such and such a tree will be the Bodhi tree in that eon. You will stand of such and such. Like the Buddha really can see all of that. I mean, Buddhas really are amazing and imponderably amazing, but amazing. And so in the Buddha Wangsa, the Buddha Chronicles, the Buddha does then talk about the previous Buddhas, how long they lived, how many enlightened disciples they had, what the names of their parents were. And so I think most of them, if I recall, there's three modes of training as a bodhisattva practitioner. There's the wisdom mode, which takes 4 asankhyas plus 100,000 eons. And that's when the Buddhas that get born in a degenerating eon, where the maximum lifespan of a human being is 100. Then there's the method of accumulating merit and virtue, according to faith, and that takes twice as long. If faith is so that's 8 asankhya and 100,000 eons. And then if a Buddha is enlightened who has taken the faith manner of cultivating his virtue, the lifespan will be longer, and there'll be less famines, less wars, more kind of conducive circumstances. In the effort approach, which apparently is what Maitreya Bodhisattva has taken, it's 16 asankhya, takes 4 times as long as the wisdom approach. They're all incredibly long, but the point is some very altruistic bodhisattvas spend twice as long, and some very altruistic bodhisattvas spend 4 times as long. And so for the bodhisattva that takes the effort mode, at the time that they become a Buddha, the world is very peaceful. There's no disease other than hunger and death, hunger, aging, and death. And so there's no wars, no famines, apparently no gender inequality, which is interesting. 84,000 princes, 84,000 princesses go forth on the first day, and they all become arahants. So it's nice to know. Yeah, I don't know. I think just knowing, I mean, I wouldn't recommend knowing the details of, it's an interesting thing to read and conducive to faith and gratitude. For me, what comes up is just a lot of gratitude and love and respect for what Buddhas put into becoming a Buddha. But I don't know if knowing about lots of them is necessarily helpful. I think the past 6 plus this one plus the next one is probably enough. It's like in essence, they're all the same. They have the purity, they have the compassion, they have the wisdom. They delayed their liberation. They cultivated virtue and extreme merit so that they could liberate. What Sumedha said when he became aware of Dipankara Buddha, with a multitude of beings walking behind him who were liberated, Sumedha thought, suppose I too were to cause a multitude to cross over, knowing my strengths. And so apparently, before one receives a prediction of Buddhahood, one has to be capable of becoming an arahant that day. So the virtue is already very palpable, very significant. But they delay their liberation for the sake of training up multitudes of beings over thousands of eons, billions of lives, so that they can help them ripen their merits over all of those lifetimes, ripen their faculties, and then help them to cross over, a multitude to cross over. So I think that's, for me, what Buddhanussati is really about, is making the mind kind of have a beautiful quality of awe, gratitude, love, appreciation, recognition of what Buddhas are, but I don't think we need to know too many details. It's other than there's the wisdom approach, the effort approach, the faith approach, and yeah, just to know the next one, I think, is enough. Set the aspiration that if we're not liberated, definitely want to meet him, and may we meet all. Until we are liberated, may we always meet with Buddhas and their teachings and their well-practiced disciples. So,